Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Imagine your entire life, your house, your bank account, your health, your family. I mean, your very breath is technically just a rental.
Right.
You do not hold the deed to any of it. And the landlord who owns all of it can break the lease at any second without asking for your permission, without giving you a heads up, and without owing you an explanation.
Yeah, it is a terrifying thought for the modern mind.
It really is. And today, we are taking a deep dive into a stack of historical and theological sources that claim that scenario is not just, a hypothetical thought experiment. It is the absolute reality of the universe.
Spot on. We are looking at the startling, very weighty doctrine of divine providence.
Yeah. And the core tension we are examining today, it centers on a single agonizing confession from a man sitting in the literal ashes of his ruined life.
Job.
Yes, the man is Job. And his confession in Job chapter 1, verse 21 is this. He says, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord."
Wow. Yeah, it's a heavy text.
It is. And we want to be clear right up front for you listening. This information is not abstract classroom theory,
No, not at all.
We are not dealing with philosophical riddles designed to keep academics busy. This is practical theology for the sickbed. This is theology for the graveyard.
Yeah, this is the framework you need for the hour of devastating loss.
Absolutely. So today's deep dive aims to dismantle the massive sense of modern entitlement we all carry around, and we want to re-anchor the soul in the absolute sovereignty of God over both life and death.
That mission is, it's totally necessary because we cannot truly grasp Job's reaction to his staggering tragedy until we recognize how drastically his worldview differs from the worldview most people hold today.
Yeah, the gap is huge.
It is vast. The gap between how Job thought about his life and how a modern person thinks about their life is just night and day.
Right, let's unpack that a bit.
Well, our modern era has been heavily shaped by Enlightenment thought. We are the products of cultural and political shifts, things like the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, which baked certain assumptions into our collective psyche.
Yeah, those unalienable rights we hear so much about.
Yes, those historical shifts have conditioned human beings to assume a right to life. And we assume this right exists not just horizontally, in relation to other humans, but vertically, in relation to God himself.
I see what you mean. We view God as a debtor.
We do. We subconsciously assume he owes us a long, healthy life, and we assume he has no right to take human life without our consent.
And you see this modern allergy to divine sovereignty flare up whenever massive tragedies occur, right?
Right.
Like, think back to when the 2004 tsunami took over 200,000 lives in the Indian Ocean. The visceral reaction from the modern mind was intense.
Yeah, the anger was palpable.
You saw immense anger directed toward the heavens, or you saw theologians and commentators making an immediate attempt to distance God from the event altogether.
Right. They argued that he must have been a helpless bystander who was crying alongside us, but lacked the ability to stop the wave.
Which is wild to think about.
Yeah.
But that reaction makes total sense if you operate from a baseline of entitlement.
Yeah, it does.
It goes back to that renting versus owning analogy I mentioned at the start. When you own a house, you hold the deed. You dictate what happens to the property.
Right, it's yours.
If someone comes in and starts tearing down walls or ripping up the floorboards, you call the police because your rights have been violated. But when you are renting, you are just a tenant. You live there at the pleasure of the landlord.
Yeah, and if the landlord decides to sell the property or alter it, you might not like it, but you do not have the ultimate say.
We walk through life acting like we hold the deed to our own existence. We act like we're the owners.
You really do.
Honestly, modern people get intensely angry if their Wi-Fi goes down for 10 minutes because we feel entitled to constant convenience.
That is so true.
But Job understood that he was only a tenant. He possessed a patriarchal worldview that completely alters how a person reacts to loss. He did not look at his children, his wealth, or his health as things he had earned or things he had an unalienable right to keep.
Right.
I think we need to break that down further. What was that patriarchal reality like, and how did people in that ancient context view the stewardship of human life?
Well, the patriarchal period was an era characterized by a very immediate, stark recognition of God as the creator and the sustainer of all things.
Okay.
In that historical setting, the reality of God's absolute ownership over the universe was not clouded by centuries of academic debate or political theories about personal autonomy.
That makes sense. They were closer to the dirt, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, spot on. Life was universally understood as a temporary stewardship. It was held at the pleasure of the Almighty, not possessed as an autonomous right.
So it was a completely different baseline.
It was. If you look back to the book of Genesis, specifically chapter 9, verses 5 and 6, you see the clear establishment of what we call horizontal rights.
Okay, lay that out for us.
So God institutes a strict reckoning for human blood after the flood. This means that humans have absolute rights horizontally against other humans who might try to shed their blood.
Right, you cannot murder your neighbor.
Yes, because your neighbor is made in the image of God. Taking their life is a severe crime against the image of the Creator.
But that horizontal right never translated into a vertical right against the Creator himself.
Never. Humans have absolutely zero rights vertically against the one who breathed life into their lungs in the first place.
Oh.
The breath in your lungs right now, the beating of your heart, the neurological firing in your brain, all of it is borrowed property.
That and a staggering thought.
The Creator who started the heartbeat has the absolute uncontested right to stop it whenever his holy wisdom dictates.
Which brings us to a massive, undeniable reality about the sheer volume of life God grants.
Yeah.
Because, before Job could ever grasp the bitter reality of his loss, his heart was heavily schooled by gratitude for the good things he had already received.
That is a crucial point. We often focus on the tragedy in Job's story, but we forget the decades of immense blessing that preceded it.
Ooh, too. I was reading through the data we pulled for this deep dive, and the sheer scale of what we call sweet providence is staggering.
Oh, the statistics on birth rates, right?
Yeah, it's wild. Roughly 127 million new lives are granted by the Creator every single year.
Wow.
If you break that down, it comes out to about 250 children born every single minute.
250 a minute.
Yeah, think about that. Every minute of every day, 250 times, a mother forgets her physical anguish because a new human being has entered the world.
That is incredible.
That is sweet providence. It is a staggering display of generosity, and that is precisely where Job starts his confession. He says, "The Lord gave."
He does not start with the loss. He starts with the gift.
Yes. Gratitude is the absolute prerequisite for surviving loss. If you do not recognize that every single breath you took prior to your tragedy was an unmerited gift, you will never survive the day that gift is reclaimed.
You will just become bitter and resentful.
Completely. So let's look at the original language there, because the Hebrew structure of Job chapter 1, verse 21 is incredibly precise here.
It really is, and it leaves no room for misunderstanding regarding who is taking the action. The inspired writer balances two active verbs.
Okay, what are they?
Well, the active verb for gave is Nathan. It is perfectly symmetrically balanced with the active verb for taken away, which is lakach.
Nathan and Lakash.
Yeah. Both of these verbs are active, meaning God is the direct, intentional agent of both the giving and the taking.
So there's no passive permission there. It's direct.
Right. What is equally vital to understand is the specific word Job did not use. He did not use the Hebrew word ganab, which translates to stolen or robbed.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, when God claims a human life, or when he removes wealth or health, he is not stealing. A person cannot steal what they already own.
Right. God is exercising a sovereign repossession of his own property.
Yes, and this directly confronts and refutes specific theological frameworks that are very popular today, like Arminianism and open theism.
Okay, let's clarify those for anyone listening who might not be familiar.
Sure, open theism is essentially the idea that God does not know the future perfectly, or that he limits his own control over the universe, so he is just reacting to tragedies as they happen.
He's up there wringing his hands.
Yeah, it paints a picture of a God who wishes things were different, but simply lacks the ability to stop human evil or natural disasters.
But the text of Job aggressively rejects that.
It does. The writer ensures we know that attributing this massive loss directly to the hand of God was not a sin. It was an act of high-altitude worship.
Job did not blame chance, and he did not view God as a helpless spectator.
No, he didn't.
Okay, hang on. I have to stop you there and push back on this, because this is where the tension gets incredibly tight for the person listening to this right now.
Go for it.
You are saying God is the direct agent, and Job is praising him for it. But if we look at the actual text of Job's story, the agents of destruction are very clearly defined, and they are not God.
That's true. They are listed out.
The text details human agents, specifically the Sabians and Chaldeans, who formed raiding parties, stole the livestock, and murdered Job's servants with swords.
Right.
It details natural agents, describing a great wind, basically a massive tornado that struck the four corners of the house and crushed Job's children.
Yeah.
It even details demonic agents, with Satan himself striking Job with loathsome sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head.
That's a comprehensive list of disasters.
So my question is, if a literal raiding party swings the sword and a literal tornado collapses the roof and literal Satan brings the disease, how can Job look past all of those immediate visible threats and say, God did it?
It's a heavy question.
Like, if a criminal steals my car, the criminal is the one who did it. If God planned for the criminal to steal my car, how is that not just shifting the blame to God and making him the author of evil?
Well, that is the crucial theological boundary we must establish. And it requires us to understand the difference between primary causes and secondary
Oh,
causes.
okay, break that down first.
Physical causes, the natural disasters, and the satanic causes are completely real. The Sabines really raided. They made a conscious, wicked choice to murder and steal.
You weren't robots.
Right, they weren't. The wind really blew due to atmospheric conditions. Satan really inflicted those sores with intense, calculated malice. But those secondary causes are never ultimate, and they are never decisive.
So they are real, but subordinate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, spot on.
Yeah.
Think of it like an author writing a book. Let us say J.R.R. Tolkien is writing about the villain Sauron.
Oh, I love this analogy.
Yeah, within the story,
Huh.
Sauron commits real evil. He's malicious, he's destructive, and he is fully responsible for his actions within the narrative. But Tolkien, as the author, is governing the entire story to bring about a glorious conclusion. Tolkien is not evil for writing a story that contains evil. He is using the villain's wicked choices to highlight the triumph of good.
That makes a lot of sense. So how does that apply to Job?
Well, the prologue of the book of Job pulls back the curtain on the heavenly court so the reader can see what Job could not see.
Job had no idea that conversation was happening.
Not at all. Satan is standing before the Lord, and it becomes immediately apparent that Satan can only act within the strict, unyielding limitations set by God's sovereign command.
Yeah, God says, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand."
Yes, Satan cannot take a single step past the boundary God draws. The Sabians, the wind, and Satan are instruments. They are not sovereigns.
Instruments, not sovereigns. That is a massive distinction.
A master craftsman can use a heavy hammer or a sharp saw to accomplish his goal, but the tools do not dictate the final outcome. The craftsman does. God governs the secondary causes perfectly, utilizing the wicked choices of men and demons to accomplish his unthwartable intent without ever committing a sin himself.
Recognizing that God commands these secondary causes and that he holds the highest authority over when the lease on life expires leads us to a very sobering question.
It does.
On what legal basis does God execute this right to take life? If you are listening to this on your commute or while doing dishes, you might be wondering why God has this legal right to issue a death sentence.
Yeah, it's a natural question to ask.
If we look at the biblical theology of death, it becomes clear that death is not a biological accident. It is not just a random virus that somehow outsmarted the human immune system, and it is not just the natural wearing down of cellular structures.
It's much more formal than that. The Apostle Paul uses a very specific Greek term, katakrima, in Romans chapter 5, verse 18.
Catachroma.
Yeah, that term describes a formal, legal sentence. It is a judicial condemnation resulting directly from the fall of man in the Garden of Eden.
Right. When Adam rebelled, he acted as the representative for all of humanity.
He did, and the resulting penalty was death. Death is a court rendering.
So it's a legal reality.
Yes. When a judge bangs the gavel in a courtroom and hands down a sentence, the officers of the court carry it out. In the same way, physical death is the execution of a righteous sentence handed down by the judge of the universe.
And the historical markers provided in the text illustrate this judicial sentence with staggering clarity. We see God exercising this right on a massive scale throughout biblical history.
Oh, absolutely. Consider the global flood in the days of Noah.
Right.
That was not just a tragic natural disaster caused by a shifting climate or unfortunate atmospheric pressure. That was God acting as a righteous judge, deliberately blotting out human wickedness on a global scale because the thoughts of men's hearts were only evil continually.
Yeah, and then you look at the Passover in Egypt.
Exactly. The Lord did not just permit a random plague to wander aimlessly through the streets of the Egyptians.
No, he made a graphic, symbolic distinction by directly striking down the firstborn of Egypt. It demonstrated his total authority over life and his judgment against Pharaoh's rebellion.
And later in the historical narratives, the text points to the Assyrian army surrounding Jerusalem in 2 Kings.
Oh, that story is intense.
185,000 Assyrian soldiers were struck down in a single night by the angel of the Lord. They woke up dead, to use the biblical phrasing.
Yeah, the absolute takeaway from these historical realities is that the Lord is the executioner of his own holy decrees.
He really is. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 39 declares, "See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God beside me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal, and there is none that can deliver out of my hand."
God is exercising total uniqueness as the Almighty. He possesses the absolute, uncontested right to deliver the sentence of death whenever his holy wisdom dictates.
He does. But this brings up a massive friction point, and it is something anyone who has ever suffered will inevitably wrestle with.
If death is a judicial sentence, but God is also a loving father to his people, what is the divine goal behind allowing such agonizing loss to strike the faithful?
The hardest question in the world.
We know God does not afflict his children randomly. Let us look at Satan's core accusation in the heavenly court when he is speaking to God about Job. Satan asks, "Does Job fear God for nothing?"
That single question is the core of so much human religion.
It really is. And it points to the first goal of bitter providence. It exposes hidden idolatry in the human heart. It asks the brutal, piercing question, do we actually love the giver, or do we just love the gifts?
Right, because suffering acts like a stress test for the soul.
Or stress test, yeah.
When you are healthy, wealthy, and comfortable, you look perfectly fine on the outside. It is easy to sing praises when your bank account is full.
Well, sure is.
But when comfort is violently stripped away, that stress test lays bare the true condition of your dependence on God. Are the bones of your faith solid, resting entirely on who God is? Or are they fractured by idolatry, resting only on what God can do for you?
That is heavy. And the sources outline 4 specific goals of this bitter providence, expanding on that spiritual stress test you just mentioned.
Yeah, the first goal is bending the stiff neck of human pride.
We are so proud.
We are naturally incredibly arrogant creatures. We build our little kingdoms, we manage our schedules, and we think we are the masters of our fate.
Until disaster strikes.
Right. When disaster strikes, it decisively teaches us that we are creatures, not sovereigns. It violently shatters the illusion of control, forcing us to our knees in humility.
Which leads to the second goal, loosening our grip on the world.
Yeah, because good things like a loving family, robust physical health, and a successful career can very easily become rival loves in our hearts.
We start to worship the creation rather than the creator.
We do, and bitter providence burns away those rival loves. It is a painful fire, but it purifies our affections so that our worship becomes focused solely on the Creator.
And the third goal is strengthening perseverance.
Right, because a faith that has never been tested is entirely unseasoned. It is theoretical.
It's just head knowledge at that point.
Exactly. Affliction trains the believer to live on the promises of God rather than relying on sight, favorable circumstances, or emotional highs. You learn to trust in the dark what God told you in the light.
I love that phrase. Trust in the dark what God told you in the light. And the fourth goal is fatherly discipline.
Yeah, the writer of Hebrews tells us that the Lord disciplines the one he loves.
He wounds in order to heal.
He empties us of our self-reliance so that he can fill us with himself. None of this suffering is arbitrary, and it is never vindictive when it comes to his children. It is precisely measured, governed, and purposeful.
We see God's purposes somewhat veiled in Job's story, though. I mean, we get glimpses of it, but Job himself did not have the full picture while he was sitting in the ashes.
No, he was completely in the dark regarding the heavenly court.
So we have to ask, where in human history do we see this massive collision of bitter pain and divine goodness most clearly?
At the cross. Job gives us a shatter, but Christ is the substance.
Yeah.
Job was a righteous man, certainly, but he was still a fallen human being who eventually needed correction and humbling from God out of the whirlwind.
Christ is the perfect, sinless sufferer who surpasses Job in every conceivable way.
He does. Christ was totally innocent.
Yeah.
He had absolutely no hidden idolatry. He did not need any impurities burned away. Yet he endured the absolute darkest, most agonizing providence imaginable.
He experienced a loss that makes Job's suffering pale in comparison because Christ endured the unfiltered wrath of God.
And the cross of Christ is the supreme vindication of everything we're discussing today.
Yes, it is.
If you want proof that God can govern evil to produce magnificent good, Look at the intersection of human wickedness and divine decree in the New Testament.
Let's look at the book of Acts, specifically chapter 2, verse 23, and chapter 4, verses 27 and 28, because it lays this out with astonishing clarity.
It does. Think about the individuals involved in the crucifixion. Pilate acted out of political cowardice.
Herod acted out of mockery.
The Roman soldiers acted with brutal, sadistic cruelty. And the mob in Jerusalem acted with with intense, unrestrained hatred.
Yeah, they were all completely morally responsible for their violence.
Yet the text in Acts insists that they did only what God's hand and God's plan had predestined to take place.
Let that sink in. The worst evil ever committed in the history of the universe, the murder of the sinless Son of God, was the exact mechanism chosen by God for the greatest good ever given, which is the salvation of his people.
It is mind-blowing.
The cross proves definitively that severe, agonizing providence does not mean God is absent. It does not mean he is weak, and it does not mean he is unjust. He is actively working his massive redemptive plan, even through the darkest hours of human history.
And because Christ absorbed the wrath and that specific katakrima, the legal condemnation of death we talked about earlier, the entire nature of suffering changes completely for the believer.
This is the turning point. Suffering is no longer a punishment from a condemning judge.
Right. For the person who has trusted in Christ, the gavel has already dropped, and the penalty was paid on the cross.
Therefore, every bitter providence, every ounce of grief, every terrible medical diagnosis now comes to the believer through nail-pierced hands.
That changes everything.
It is governed entirely by a Father who secures a premillennial hope for his people.
And let us define that term simply. Premillennial hope refers to the bodily return of Christ to establish a physical kingdom.
It means our hope is not just floating on a cloud playing a harp.
No, our hope is a physical resurrection. We will have new bodies on a restored earth. The cross guarantees that the pain you're experiencing right now is never wasted, and the story never ever ends in the grave.
The grave is just a temporary waiting room before the resurrection.
That massive theological reality is what provides actual, sustainable pastoral comfort for the people sitting in the pews. We cannot just leave this in the realm of high theology. We have to apply it to real people facing real-world terrors.
Yeah, how do you take the doctrine of divine sovereignty into a hospital room?
Well, first, for the grieving believer, the text offers immense freedom. Notice what Job did when he heard the news.
He tore his robe, he shaved his head, and he fell to the ground.
The text grants explicit permission to weep. Stoicism is not a biblical virtue.
Pretending that the pain does not hurt, or pasting on a fake smile and saying God is good all the time while your heart is shattering, is not what God demands.
No, grief is holy. Jesus himself wept at the tomb of Lazarus.
But the direction of that grief is clear. Lamentation must never harden into accusation.
Right, you can cry out to God in agony, you can express your confusion and your deep sorrow, but you cannot charge him with a crime. You cannot point your finger at the heavens and say, "You wronged me."
Then there is the direct application for the fearful. So many believers live in a state of constant, paralyzing anxiety about the future.
Oh yes, the human imagination is a relentless machine, constantly churning out worst-case scenarios about health, about finances, or about the safety of our children.
We lie awake at night, plotting out how we will survive a dozen different tragedies that have not even happened yet.
But knowing that God governs the future with absolute, meticulous sovereignty acts as a strong tower.
The path forward will not necessarily be easy. In fact, based on the lives of the apostles and the prophets, it might be incredibly painful.
But it is a governed path.
It is completely free from chaotic, random chance. You are not at the mercy of a random universe or a turning wheel of fate.
Every single step, every trial, and every sorrow is filtered through the wise, loving fingers of the Almighty before it ever reaches you.
We also have to address the prosperous, and this might be the most dangerous category of all.
It really might be. There's a severe warning here for those who are currently experiencing a season of abundance.
Prosperity dulls our dependence.
When your bank account is full, your family is healthy, and your career is thriving, it is incredibly easy to forget that you are living on borrowed breath.
We start to believe we actually own the house.
We do. Believers must hold their families, their jobs, and their physical health with an open hand. You must recognize them as temporary stewardships, ready to release them back to the owner whenever he calls for them.
If you clutch the gifts too tightly, If you wrap your entire identity around your children or your success, your hands will be crushed when God decides to repossess his property.
You have to actively practice gratitude for the sweet providence while simultaneously acknowledging that the Lord who gave has the absolute right to take away.
So, synthesizing all of this, we are looking at God's absolute ownership of human life and a total rejection of modern entitlement.
Yes.
We recognize the reality of secondary causes, the wind, the diseases, the hostile actions of others, but we know they operate strictly under divine restriction.
They cannot move a millimeter past what God ordains.
And we hold fast to the final hope secured by Christ, who absorbed the bitter reality of death so that we would never have to face the wrath of the judge. Our suffering is now fatherly discipline designed to conform us to the image of Christ.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final consideration built directly upon the core tension of this source text.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you can accept that God's absolute ownership extends over the darkest, most agonizing days of your life, the days you lose your job, the days you sit in a hospital room, the days you stand by a grave, how does that reality shift the way you view the perfectly ordinary mundane hours of your Tuesday?
Oh, that is a convicting thought.
If you do not own your tragedies, you do not own your triumphs either. You do not own your free time. You do not own your hobbies, your weekend plans, or your talents.
Yeah.
Consider what it means to yield the deed to your very breath today. Recognizing that every quiet moment, every cup of coffee, every conversation with a friend is a stewardship from the same sovereign hand changes everything. You are living on his time, sustained by his might for his glory.
Remember the rented house? We do not hold the deed. We are just tenants trusting the perfect wisdom of the owner who deals with us not according to our sins, but according to his massive grace. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the absolute sovereignty of God over life, death, and everything in between. Until next time.